What's going on, Not Move Nation? Welcome to the Not Move podcast. Today is October 30th at 2:31 p.m. Eastern Time. We have a football game on tonight. Baltimore Ravens at Miami Dolphins. Right now, the book that I'm looking at, I see the Ravens are favored by 7.5, with the over-under being 51.5. But before we get started, I'd like to say thank you to the supporters, subscribers, followers. We really appreciate you guys here at the Not Move podcast. And a special thanks to our sponsors, BetUS, MyBookie.ag, Walmart.com, Open Goal, MLB, and NFL Pro Shops. Also, if you want access to Southgate's parlays, it's $15 per day, $49.99 per week. I don't like parlays a whole lot, so and I know that a lot of people do. I'm not here to tell you to not do parlays or to do them, but if you're interested in that, there is that option. Also, I know a lot of people don't have time to, view all of the videos that we make. So, yeah, that's a way to get some information without having to watch videos within the Not Move podcast. I hear Southgate's pretty good at these parlays, so feel free to check that out. You should see, if you scan that barcode, that QR code up in the top left-hand corner, it should take you to all that information. Like I said, a lot of deals from Walmart.com, BetUS, MyBookie.ag, Open Goal, all of the sponsors, and Southgate's parlays. Okay, so let's get started here. Baltimore leads the all-time series against the Dolphins 11-8. Lamar Jackson, who is projected to play tonight, coming back from that hamstring injury. He has a 2-2 career record against the Miami Dolphins, whereas Tua, the quarterback for Miami, has a 2-1 career record against Baltimore. All right. This season, Baltimore's 2-5 against the spread. Miami's 4-4 against the spread. But when I'm looking at Lamar Jackson's game log, I see that he has only played in 4 games this year. So the Ravens have played a total of 7, so they've almost missed him for half of their games. I can't remember if he was injured and taken out in one of those games or not, but maybe a little bit longer than that. So some of these numbers that I'm looking at for Baltimore could very well be skewed, meaning inaccurate, since they had a backup quarterback in the, at least 3 of those weeks. But Baltimore carries a 2-5 record into this matchup. Miami is carrying a 2-6 record into this matchup. Tyreek Hill, as far as I know, is still out. So other than that, I don't see any big-time injuries on the offensive side of the ball for either team. I do see that the Miami Dolphins main kicker, Jason Sanders, doesn't look like he's played at all this year, though. And if he has, it was maybe for a game, but he's still on the IR, it looks like. But, yeah, other than that, Julian Hill, tight end for Miami, ruled out. So it looks like the starting tight end for Miami tonight is going to be Tanner Connor. And he was targeted twice in the Week 8 win that the Dolphins had against the Atlanta Falcons. So, all right. So, I do see that Miami has a slight passing advantage. Now, that could be different with Lamar Jackson back in, but really, I think it's partially due to Lamar Jackson being out. Baltimore currently ranks 28th in passing yards per game. And Miami's pass defense has been pretty good. They rank 11th best this season in passing yards allowed per game. Now Miami, they're without Tyreek Hill, and they rank 26th in passing yards per game. But Baltimore's pass defense is much weaker than Miami's pass defense. So, I do think that Miami does have a pass advantage in this game. And Miami likes to call a high percentage of passing plays relative to the other teams in the league. Miami ranks 9th in passing play percentage. Baltimore ranks 26th in passing play percentage. So there's not a whole lot of teams that call a higher percentage of rushing plays than the Baltimore Ravens do this season. And I believe that was the case last year. I mean, we can look that up. Passing play percentage in the NFL, I'll look it up for last year. I believe they ran the ball more than any other team last year, the second most in regards to play calling, rushing plays. So, yeah, they are a more run-focused team, but that doesn't mean that they can't air it out from time to time, So, I mentioned that I do still think even with Lamar back, Miami probably has a slight passing advantage just because of Baltimore's weak pass defense. With that being said, the Baltimore Ravens have allowed the 11th most passing yards to quarterbacks this season, according to fantasy.nfl.com. And Tua's passing yards, last that I checked, were over or under 218 and a half. Now, he's only gone over that in 2 out of 8 games this season, but he did go over that in 7 out of 11 games in 2024. He's gone over that line in 2 out of 3 career games against Baltimore. And Tua actually recorded his single game passing yards record against the Ravens on September 18th, 2022. He had 469 passing yards in that game. So he torched them back in 2022. And in that same game, Jalen Waddle recorded his single game receiving yards record. He had 171 yards and 11 receptions. So these guys historically have had career games against the Baltimore Ravens. But let's go back, to the Tua passing yards. Just because he has such good history against them, and Miami is projected to be trailing at some point in this game, maybe even late in the game, I do think that Miami may be forced to pass the ball. Not only do they like to pass the ball, but if they're trailing late in this game, they may be forced to against this weak Baltimore pass defense. So I would have to lean towards the over on that. Passing yards for Tua. And then rushing yards. Now, Baltimore ranks 8th best in rushing yards allowed to quarterbacks this season. And when I think of Tua, I don't necessarily think of, a mobile quarterback. But he has gone over the 2.5 rushing yards in 6 out of 8 games this season. He went over that in 6 out of 11 games in 2024, so more than half of his games last season. And then he's only gone over that line in 1 out of 3 career games against Baltimore. But he did rush for a touchdown in one of those games. So if you were thinking about Tua anytime touchdown tonight for some reason, the odds are against you, but at least he does have one against the Ravens throughout his 3-game history against them throughout his career. And just to elaborate a little bit more on this Baltimore Ravens rush defense, they rank 23rd in rushing yards allowed per game. And they also rank 21st in opponent rushing yards per attempt. So when teams are rushing against Baltimore, they are getting a decent chunk of yardage. There are other teams that are worse in the league, like Miami. We'll talk about their rush defense here shortly. But, back to the passing game for Miami, something else that I want to mention is, I mentioned that Baltimore's pass defense is weak, but they also rank 20th in opponent yards per completion, meaning they're allowing a good chunk of yardage whenever teams are passing the ball against them. They are below average. They're not terrible, but they're below average in that category. Jalen Waddle ranks 24th best and first best on this Miami Dolphins team, but he ranks 24th in the entire NFL in yards per catch this season. Baltimore hasn't been extremely vulnerable it's okay, Ivan. Baltimore hasn't been extremely vulnerable to the receiving yards allowed to wide receivers this season, and they haven't been great at defending against it either. They've been, somewhere in the middle. And I didn't look up Jalen Waddle's over/under on receiving yards, but he did, like I mentioned just a minute ago, he set his single game receiving yards record against Baltimore back in 2022. So he's capable of it. He is the guy right now that, from my understanding, that Tua is really targeting. And we can, especially since Tyreek Hill is out. And, we can go back to some of these game logs, right, against Atlanta, some of these most recent games. Atlanta, Browns, Chargers. Let's see, who Tua is targeting with Tyreek Hill out. So Achane actually against the Falcons the last game received the most targets with 7. And then it was Waddle with 6, Malik Washington with 5. And then against the Browns in week 7, so 2 weeks ago, receiving targets, Malik Washington actually received 8. Waddle only 4, and Achane 5. And then in that game against the Chargers, Waddle had 8, and then Achane 6, and Washington 5. So it really seems like those 3 guys are the guys that are getting the bulk of the targets for this Miami Dolphins team with Tyreek Hill being out. So, I also think Jalen Waddle has an anytime touchdown potential. All right. When I'm looking at the Miami Dolphins touchdown leaders, it's Waddle. Waddle has 4 touchdowns this season, and then it's Achane. And believe it or not, scratch that. Achane has 4 receiving touchdowns and 3 rushing touchdowns. So he's really the touchdown leader. And then it's Waddle with 4 receiving touchdowns. Darren Waller, who is not playing. So, that's kind of limits Miami to, I feel like it limits them to really focusing on trying to get Achane and or Waddle to score their touchdowns. Red zone receiving statistics. When Miami does get into the red zone this season, Miami is doing pretty good at converting touchdowns. They rank 11th best at that. At entering the red zone when they are in the red zone at converting those touchdowns. The problem for Miami this year has been getting into the red zone. They rank 20th in red zone attempts per game, but luckily for them, they're going up against a defense who has allowed the most red zone attempts per game to opposing teams and are near the bottom of the league in allowing touchdowns when teams do enter the red zone. And when I'm looking at the leading red zone target for this Miami offense, I see Jalen Waddle has 8 total red zone targets this season. And then it's Washington with 7, and then Achane with 6. Obviously, Achane has that rushing capability as well. So those 3 guys are really the guys that I would look to for those anytime touchdowns. So we mentioned Waddle. Achane did score a touchdown in his only career game against Baltimore. Okay. He also went over his rushing yards, which is listed at 56.5 tonight. He had 107 rushing yards in his only career game against Baltimore, 30 receiving yards, 4 receptions, and 1 receiving touchdown. And we'll look into Baltimore's defense a little bit more to see where they've been allowing the most touchdowns relative to the other teams in the league. But I don't know enough about Malik Washington, I don't feel like, to be comfortable with making that a play for an anytime touchdown. We can go look to see if he's ever played against Baltimore. This is his second year in the league. He's never played against Baltimore, so it's tougher for me to pinpoint with these players that are new or sophomores because there's not a lot of history on them. Yeah, if you like him, I could see him getting in the end zone, but let's go look at where Baltimore has been vulnerable. Washington is the wide receiver for Miami. Waddle. Oh, waffle. Waddle for a touchdown and 100 yards today. Yeah, that'd be nice, man. Something else we can look at too is Waddle scoring more touchdowns at home, on the road. Is there a big difference in those splits? So we can go check that out. But yeah, Waddle had a great game in his he scored 2 touchdowns in his only career game against Baltimore, and he set his single game receiving yards record against them on September 18th in 2022. He had 171 receiving yards and 11 receptions. So, that'd be nice if he could do that tonight for people that are looking for Waddle to have a big game here. So let's go look to see where Baltimore has allowed a lot of touchdowns. They've allowed 10 touchdowns to wide receivers this season. 10 TDs to wide receivers, which ranks third most in the league. Third most touchdowns allowed to those wide receivers. Baltimore hasn't allowed a lot of tight end touchdowns, guys. So they've only allowed 2. And relative to the other teams in the league, they rank second best. And then running back rushing touchdowns allowed. Baltimore's allowed the third most. Rushing touchdowns to running backs with 8. And then what about receiving touchdowns to running backs? They've allowed 2. And the most receiving touchdowns a team has allowed to a running back this year is 4. So there's not a big difference between the best and the worst. So they're somewhere in the middle. But touchdowns to running backs. Achane has that capability. I mentioned how Achane has 4 receiving touchdowns this season. He actually has more receiving touchdowns than rushing touchdowns. And, Baltimore, in regards to yardage allowed to wide receivers or running backs, which one have they allowed more to relative to the other teams in the league? They're about middle of the pack on the, let's see, receiving yards allowed to running backs. They've allowed 3, 6, 9, the 13th most receiving yards to running backs this season. And then wide receivers, they've allowed the 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14th most. So it's real close, I like that dual threat capability for Achane. I could see him and Waddle getting into the end zone in this game. And then we'll talk about We'll talk about the Ravens offense here in just a second. I do want to mention that Baltimore has allowed the 6th most receptions to running back or to wide receivers this season. Excuse me, the 6th most receptions to wide receivers. So if you're looking for reception props for Miami, I think that's looking pretty decent. Bettors, what do you think about Dolphins team total over 20.5 or Dolphins for 2.5 touchdowns? It seems like the Dolphins score about 20 every time they play, and I believe Ravens are giving up more than 3 per game. Okay. Yeah, let's go take a look at that. Thank you for the question there, Ivan. So 20.5 team total Dolphins, 2.5 touchdowns allowed per game, or 2.5 touchdowns over under for Dolphins. So let's go check it out. Okay, so the Dolphins are playing at home tonight, right? Points per game at home for the Dolphins. Let's go check it out. At home this season, the Dolphins are above average in points per game scored at home. They're scoring 27 points per game at home this season. Miami, 27 points per game at home. And points per game allowed in the NFL this season. When Baltimore is on the road, they are allowing the most points per game on the road. Baltimore allows 39 points per game on the road. So we'll take we'll add those two numbers together. So what do we have here? 39 plus 27 and divide that by 2. You get 33. So just based on that equation, Miami gets 33 points tonight. It's hard for me to believe that, it almost seems too good to be true. You know what I mean? Why? And usually I don't ask myself, why are the books making that line so short, so small for Miami there? And I actually just want to look to see what their team total is. It is 21 or 20.5. It seems almost too good to be true, Let's go look at the Dolphins and how many points they've scored in the last, let's say, 5 games against Baltimore as well. Let's say the last 5 games that they've played in Miami, right? So I'm looking at their history here. They've scored 22, 10, 15, 13, and 23. Divided by 5. So in their last 5 games, in Miami's last 5 games against Baltimore, that was played at Miami, Miami is averaging 16.6 points per game. And it doesn't look like, looks like one time, 2 out of the last 5 games they've played against Baltimore at Miami, they have gone over that total. I'm not as good at handicapping over-unders. All right, I'll let you guys know that now. I feel much more comfortable in money lines and spreads than anything. I'm not even including player props. I feel more comfortable with money lines and spreads more than player props, over/under, game totals, total points scored in a game. But it almost seems too good to be true here, Ivan. I mean, both of these teams are 6-1 to the over this season. Well, Miami's 6-1-1. Uh, but they're the best teams in the NFL at going over, you know? And the statistics tell me that, you know, Miami is going to score probably somewhere between that 33 that we were talking about and the 16.6, which makes them go over. But it, like I said, man, it almost seems too good to be true. I talked to a guy the other day. He said that he likes the over in this one. Like I said, I feel confident. I feel more confident in other things. And the over under is something that I don't really handicap, but I hope that helps you out, man. I mean, every time they play the Ravens, oh, I believe everyone on Ravens today, I think it's a perfect spot for Dolphins. I'm feeling the same way. Now, I think Baltimore does win this game, but you know, I'm thinking Miami covers that plus 7.5. I just don't think Baltimore's defense is necessarily good enough. But you know, that Baltimore team will be fired up with LJ coming back. So, you know, Ivan, I know that you are always kind of looking at the Tua rushing props. I don't know if you joined late or if you heard me talking about it, but the Ravens have allowed the 8th fewest rushing yards to quarterbacks this season. Tua's gone over the 2.5 rushing yards in 6 out of 8 games this season. 6 out of 11 in 2024. Only 1 out of 3 career games against Baltimore, but he did rush for a touchdown against Baltimore in one of those games. I literally think he had 0 rushing yards and 1 touchdown. So he must have rushed for a loss or something in that game and then rushed for that touchdown. So, and, you know, I already talked about Achane. Yeah, I could see him breaking out for some decent gains in this one. You know, Baltimore ranks 21st in opponent rushing yards per attempt. Achane ranks 12th best in the NFL in rushing yards per carry, per attempt. Baltimore's rush defense isn't very good either. So, and Achane had a good game against him in his only career game against them. So I could see it, but, you know, when I'm looking at where is Baltimore most vulnerable to a specific position relative to the other teams in the league, I'm seeing that they're most vulnerable to wide receiver receptions. Wide receiver receptions, guys. And then looks like receiving yards allowed to tight ends. Now, we already talked about how like Darren Waller's not in and stuff, but this Tanner Connor guy could be going under the radar here for the Miami Dolphin team. I just don't know enough about him, but if you have him on your radar, I think you're in a good spot here. I believe everyone on Ravens today. I think it's perfect spot for Dolphins. Yeah, man. I'm getting those same vibes. Like I said, I don't think the Dolphins win this one. I don't feel comfortable enough to put my survivor pick on the Ravens tonight. I could see Miami upsetting them. I mean, I'm not trying to go against a team that has, you know, Tua, who set his career single game passing yards record against Baltimore, and Waddle, who set his single game receiving yard record against Baltimore. Also, you know, worth mentioning, man, these teams are looks like they're turning the ball over a little bit. Total turnovers, NFL. I looked at the turnover differential earlier. Both of these teams have bad turnover differentials. But I'm just trying to see. Yeah, Dolphins have 12 total turnovers this year. Ravens have 10. So they're turning the ball over. Yeah, if you kind of want to go full contrarian today, it'd be what, Miami and the under, probably. like I said, it makes sense for it to go over, but I've just noticed sometimes when things make the most sense, that's when the crazy stuff happens. So, um, yeah, my most comfortable play in this one's going to be the Dolphins plus the 7.5. I was looking at basketball earlier, and I think I feel more comfortable about one or two NBA games today. But I'll run the NBA show here in just a little bit. Let's talk about Baltimore a little bit. The offense for Baltimore. All right. So Miami, as I mentioned, their pass defense is much better than their rush defense in regards to yards allowed per game. Halloween Eve, yeah. Happy Halloween Eve. So as so Baltimore. Let's talk about their rushing attack first, because when I think of Baltimore, that's what I think of is Baltimore running the ball. As I mentioned near the start of the show, Baltimore calls a high percentage of rushing plays. They ranked 26th in the league in passing play percentage. Last season, they called the second highest rushing play total out of all the teams in the league. So I think with Lamar Jackson back too, they're going to be very run focused tonight against a Miami team that is very weak against the run. I believe they held up decently last week, if I can remember correctly. But I think heading into last week, they allowed the most rushing yards per game to opposing teams, and Baltimore ranks 8th best in rushing yards per game. Miami has allowed the 8th most rushing yards to quarterbacks this season. Miami's allowed the 3rd most rushing yards to running backs this season. Last that I checked, Lamar Jackson over under 36.5 rushing yards. He's gone over that in half of his games that he's played in this season. He went over that total in 15 out of 19 games in 2024. And then he's gone over that total in 2 out of 4 career games against Miami. He scored a rushing touchdown in 1 out of 4 career games against Miami. So if you're thinking about Lamar Jackson touchdown, we'll look into it a little bit more, but that's not the best history against the Dolphins. And, I think Derrick Henry had a really good game, his last game, right? Yeah. 71 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. I think a lot of people are going to be interested in Henry tonight for good reasons. But I saw that his over-under on rushing yards was 90.5, and he hasn't gone over that in 3 career games against Miami. He's over 3 to that over in career games against Miami, and he's never scored a touchdown against Miami in 3 career games. Now, history doesn't mean everything. I do think he's in a good spot tonight, as well as Lamar Jackson. But let's look into this a little bit more. What I kind of want to know is what type of does Miami, I believe they play on grass, but does Miami Dolphins play on turf or grass? Looks like grass. All right. So if we look at Lamar Jackson's game log here, and if we look at Derrick Henry's game log here, I'm looking at ESPN.com, and I'm gonna go filter this by splits for both of these players to see if there's a significant difference if they're rushing better on turf or grass. Usually I have this stuff already prepared, but with with NBA backup, my time has been really full. So this is the passing. I want rushing for Lamar Jackson on grass versus turf. So this year, he's had less carries on turf and is averaging a lot more carries on turf. I don't think this year is a good example just because he's missed some games. Let's go look at last season. So that's interesting. So last year, he had more than, how do I word this? He had 44 carries on turf and 95 on grass. So he had over double the amount of carries on grass. And he averaged more yards per carry on turf, and he scored more rushing touchdowns on turf. Now let's go look to see if we see anything for 2023. He had 5 touchdowns, rushing touchdowns on grass. He didn't play a lot on turf though. But I do. If you see like a significant difference between the two, the year before that averaged more rushing yards per carry on turf. I just want to see if we see, the year before that, more rushing yards per carry on turf. This one's grass. I don't really see a whole lot to, make me sway one way or another more on him. And I'm just kind of interested in Derrick Henry too. Now, if I see a player that is significantly better on turf than grass, like every season, then I'm like, okay. Derrick Henry averaged more. Let's see. Now we're looking at rushing. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. I'm just looking into this a little bit. Derrick Henry, more rushing yards per carry on grass last season. On turf the year before. On turf the year before that. Grass. So it doesn't really look like there's much into it, but I did want to look into it. And, if you guys have the time, that's what I would do maybe with some of these receivers and, even with Derrick Henry or, receiving the ball, Justice Hill. Are they getting more yards per catch on turf versus grass consistently? Because sometimes I'll see that, I will see that a player has every year for the past 5 years has averaged a significant bigger number of receiving yards on turf than grass or vice versa. So I know we got off track a little bit, but I wanted to see, because I was just trying to like lean one way or another, like which one would I go with between those two if I had to choose, Jackson over the rushing or Derrick Henry. I almost think Derrick Henry's spot is too good to be true. And I think I would just have to lean towards Lamar Jackson, because I also think that a lot of people are going to be hesitant playing Lamar Jackson to go over rushing yards coming on his first day back from a hamstring injury. So if you want to go contrarian, I would think Lamar Jackson rushing yards here. But honestly, like statistically, Derrick Henry's probably in a better spot just against this defense. Don't surprise you see Karma leave this game at some point. If you see Lamar leaving this game at some point tonight, says Ivan. Don't be surprised if you see Lamar leaving this game at some point. Justice Hill today, bettors, what prop would be best? You already, for first touchdown. So I saw that Miami was vulnerable to receiving yards allowed to running backs and receptions allowed to running backs. They've allowed the 5th most receiving yards to running backs and the 8th most receptions to running backs. Last that I checked, Justice Hill over under 16.5 receiving yards. He's gone over that in 4 out of 7 games this season, 7 out of 17 games in 2024. Only 1 out of 3 career games against Miami, he's gone over that total, and he has scored 1+ touchdown. Or it was only 1 touchdown, exactly 1 touchdown in 1 out of 3 career games against Miami. So at least you have that working for you if you like Justice Hill anytime touchdown tonight. And sometimes in these primetime games, that's what it seems like, Everybody's got Henry for the anytime, and then here comes Justice Hill. Justice Hill has 1 rushing touchdown this season. Justice Hill has 1 receiving touchdown this season. I think I would probably have to lean more towards the receptions, but I got to look at this. I got to look at the Baltimore Ravens game logs this season when Lamar Jackson was playing. I want to know, if he was targeting Justice Hill a lot or not. So let's look at these 4 games that Lamar Jackson played in, starting with the first game against the Bills, which was, I believe it was a primetime game. I can't remember. I could look, but I'm not going to waste my time looking to see if it was primetime or not. But in this first game of the regular season, I mean, Baltimore put up 40 points in a very competitive game against Buffalo. Now, I think if I remember correctly, Buffalo came back there at the end. So Justice Hill only saw 2 targets compared to Zay Flowers' 9, Rashad Bateman's 4 in that first game. And then against Tennessee, or not against Cleveland, when they blew Cleveland out of the water here, Justice Hill had 3 targets. And then Justice Hill had 4 targets against a competitive game against the Lions. And then he had 6 targets against the Chiefs, who receiving yards allowed to running backs. The Chiefs have been vulnerable to receiving yards allowed to running backs, just like Miami is. Miami's actually more vulnerable to that. So who were some of these teams that they played against? Cleveland, who has allowed the fewest receiving yards to running backs. What about receptions? I'm more so not just receiving yards, but receptions. So Miami has allowed more receptions to the running back position than the Chiefs, and both of them are below average. Houston has allowed the fewest. Buffalo's been good at that. Cleveland's been good at that. So it's not surprising, right, that Justice Hill saw that many targets against the Chiefs, because that's where the Chiefs were pretty vulnerable to. I mean, other than that, the Chiefs' defense is pretty solid. Miami does have other vulnerabilities in their defense than the Chiefs do, but they have allowed some receiving yards and receptions to running backs. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Justice Hill get a few more looks tonight. I mean, if I'm the Ravens and if I'm, in passing situations, that's probably what I'm looking for, and especially because Miami has allowed the 2nd fewest receiving yards to wide receivers this season and the 7th fewest receptions to wide receivers. So that makes me skeptical about the Baltimore Ravens wide receiving corp tonight. Also, I mentioned that the Ravens are a relatively run-focused team. So you include that with the fact that Miami's pass defense has actually been pretty solid this season, and they've been limiting those receiving yards to wide receivers really well, and receptions. Makes me like Justice Hill a little bit more, since through the air, that's where Miami is more vulnerable to. But let's not forget about that tight end position either. Miami is vulnerable to that receiving yards allowed to tight ends and receptions allowed to tight ends. I mean, Mark Andrews, guys, and then I'll get to your comments here after I talk about the Ravens tight ends real quick. Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely, right? Definitely 2 guys that we have to talk about here. So I really just want to know when Lamar Jackson was in. Isaiah Likely, if you guys can remember, I'm sure you do, but Isaiah Likely wasn't in when LJ was in earlier this year. And then I think when LJ came out, that's when Isaiah Likely came in. So these 2 haven't played a game together this season. And I do think there could be some chemistry issues there with that. Well, with this being their first game back. Um, Last that I checked, Mark Andrews over under 28.5 receiving yards. He's only gone over that in 3 out of 7 games this season, which isn't terrible, but he did go over that in 12 out of 19 games in 2024. And he's gone over that line in 3 out of 3 career games against Miami. Mark Andrews has also had a touchdown in every career game that he's played against Miami. He's also had 2 100-plus receiving yards in 3 career games against Miami, in 2 out of 3 career games against Miami. So historically, the situation looks great for Mark Andrews. Now, I don't know how often Lamar Jackson was targeting Mark Andrews in the red zone this season, but I do see in a game against Detroit, he was targeted the second most times, 6 times, scored 2 touchdowns. And there was only one game that Lamar Jackson played in this season that Mark Andrews recorded a receiving touchdown, and it was in the same game. He actually recorded 2 receiving touchdowns in the same game. But he saw a good amount of targets in this other game against the Chiefs. He saw 8 targets, and so did Zay Flowers. So I think the potential's there for Mark Andrews. I mean, I have to like the fact that he could get that anytime touchdown. I mean, he's had a touchdown in all 3 career games that he's ever played in against Miami. And when we look at receiving touchdowns allowed by the Dolphins to tight ends this season, they've only allowed 3. We have some teams that have allowed 5, 6, and even 10. The Bengals have allowed 10. But, yeah, historically, I think it looks good. Sorry if I neglected you love Andrews' touchdowns, yards, receptions too. Right on, man. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. Like I said, I would have to lean more towards Andrews than likely, and I actually like Andrews in this game today with that history. I know he's probably doesn't have the same workload that he normally did earlier in his career, but it's hard not to like that history. Better's another reason why I like Dolphins tonight is because I heard Dolphins defensive coach was on the Ravens just last year. Is this true? Let's go take a look. Dolphins defensive coordinator or just coach? Let's go look. Coach on the Ravens last season. Let's just type that in this. Anthony Weaver. Comes to Miami from the Ravens, where he recently was the assistant head coach / defensive line, the former associate head coach for the Baltimore Ravens. So, yeah, it looks like – let's just go here to NFL.com. So, Anthony Weaver, Baltimore Ravens. Let's just see what he did. Job description here. Let's just type that in here. He was the defensive line coach and run game coordinator. So, yeah, defensive coach, it looks like. Yep. Good call there, Ivan. Primetime equals Zay Flowers, no shows. Flowers under every prop today. Dude, I kind of like Zay Flowers today. I saw a post about it that made me like it. I can't remember the exact details, but he has played 1 career game against Miami and had 106 receiving yards and a touchdown. This also seemed like Lamar Jackson's favorite target this season. When I was looking at the 4 games that Lamar Jackson has played in, I mean, he seems like the most consistent guy who's getting targets. He had 9 targets against Buffalo in week 1 compared to the next guy, Rashad Bateman, who had 4. And then against the Browns in week 2, he had 11 targets. The next guy had 4, Bateman again. Week 3, Bateman led the target share, and then it was Andrews, and then it was Justice Hill. Zay Flowers only had 3 that game. So it looks like they gave him a little bit of a break. And then week 4 against Kansas City, he led the team in target share. He was tied with Andrews. So it seems like Jackson is really liking to go to Zay Flowers. So Zay Flowers, from my understanding, is pretty good at yards per catch, if I'm not mistaken. Let me go take a look. I didn't look this up earlier because there's a reason for it. Let me just go take a look. Looks like Bateman is actually getting more yards per catch, and then it's Flowers this season. But here's the thing, is that Miami has, even though Miami ranks 8th best this season in opponent yards per completion. So when teams are completing a pass against Miami, they're not allowing a big chunk of yardage. And like I said, they're just more vulnerable to other positions. They're actually really good at defending the receiving yards to wide receivers, the receptions to wide receivers. Yes, it's any given Sunday, or in this case, any given Thursday. Anything can happen, any time, any place. But statistically, Miami's been good at defending against that wide receiver position. If I'm the Baltimore Ravens tonight and I'm throwing the ball, I'm looking for Justice Hill and or Mark Andrews and maybe Isaiah Likely. But I feel like this is a must-win game for Baltimore, and I'm not necessarily if I'm Lamar Jackson, I'm not necessarily trying to target a tight end who I haven't played a game with this season in a must-win game. And we have to talk about the red zone a little bit, right? So Baltimore has actually done a great job at getting into the red zone this season, and Miami's done a terrible job at letting teams into the red zone against them. With that being said, Miami, they've actually really been doing a good job in the red zone. They're not necessarily good at getting into the red zone or preventing teams from getting into the red zone on them, but they are good at stopping teams from converting touchdowns against them, and they are good, pretty good at converting touchdowns when they enter the red zone. Baltimore has done terrible this year with the red zone conversion, but come on, Lamar Jackson's been out 3 games at least, So, yeah, the Ravens, I believe, last year were like really, really good at the red zone conversion rate. So, let's not necessarily let this number fool us. They ranked first best in the NFL last year in red zone touchdown scoring and converting touchdowns. So, but still, Miami's defense has been good overall. Even let's say Baltimore's the best team at converting red zone touchdowns this season. I still just give Baltimore a slight red zone conversion advantage because their defense has been bad at preventing those red zone scoring touchdowns. On third downs this season, Miami's been pretty dang good. They rank 9th best. There's nothing more frustrating, I feel like, than rooting for one team, getting the opposing team on a third down, and they just keep converting against you. It's like, okay, it's third and 8. Boom, Miami first down. Okay. Third and 4. Oh, here comes a Miami first down. Miami's been doing great at third down converting this season. They rank 9th best, and Baltimore, ranks 28th in opponent third down conversion rate. Now, Baltimore's actually been doing good too. I don't see a huge advantage for Miami in that category, if any. You know, and I don't know if Baltimore has been shorthanded on the defensive side of the ball this year. I honestly don't know if they're getting some defensive players back or what the case is with that defense. I expected more from their defense, especially with that rush defense this year. I believe they ranked first best in rushing yards per game and rushing yards allowed per game last year. So it's just been a disaster almost. Let's see here. Mark Andrews loves primetime games. Last year he was on a trend. He can just not drop the ball, right? Yeah, like that game. In the playoffs? Oh wow, maybe I'm wrong about Flowers. Lamar Jackson from Miami area, I heard too. Oh, yeah. I mean that's man. Lamar Jackson, where is he from? Yeah, Florida. So it's a little homecoming here for him. That's real good insight there. So if you guys like Lamar Jackson, if you guys like the Ravens getting this game tonight, if you like Lamar Jackson props, I think that's a benefit. Maybe he has friends and family coming to watch the game, and he really wants to show out. I do give Miami. Really when I'm looking at these team numbers, I'm taking it with a grain of salt, right? Because Jackson's been out. I have in my notes here that Miami does have a sacks on the quarterback advantage, but I don't feel like that's going to be true. With Lamar Jackson back in, he's just very mobile. Cleveland got 3 sacks on him. Now Detroit got 7 on him. So, he is a sackable quarterback. Just because you're mobile doesn't mean that you can't get sacked. But I feel like Baltimore is going to have a better chance of not getting sacked tonight with Lamar Jackson than any other quarterback that they've played with this season. So I think we've kind of touched up on everything. Ivan, I think I saw you post on one of your social media pages about Lamar Jackson, like a trend about him going over 1.5 passing touchdowns. He's gone over that in 3 out of 4 games this season, went over in 14 out of 19 games in 2024. He's gone over the 1.5 passing touchdown total in 3 out of 4 career games against Miami. Passing touchdowns allowed by Miami this year by quarterbacks. Looks like they're about average to a slightly above average at that. Not necessarily a play that I love, but you got some good things going for you if you do love it. And you guys have a lot of time between now up until game time to do some more research. Maybe go listen to some other people and see what their thoughts are. Because I'm not the know-it-all. I don't know everything. For instance, I think there was a guy on the Not Move podcast not too long ago that said Lamar Jackson is like really good against zone defense or something. So maybe that's going to be beneficial if that's what Miami's playing tonight. Hopkins, if you guys were interested in Hopkins, anytime touchdown. He scored a touchdown in 2 out of 5 career games against Miami. Isaiah Likely hasn't gone over the 21.5 receiving yard line in any game this season, 0 for 4. But he did go over in his only career game against Miami, and he did not score a touchdown in that game. Achane, I feel like he could be in a decent spot in this game. It feels like also, I don't think I mentioned this, but Derrick Henry ranks 18th best in yards per carry in the NFL this season. Miami has allowed the 3rd most rushing yards per attempt. or the fourth most, 32, 31, 30. Yeah, the fourth most rushing yards per attempt. So basically what I'm saying is that teams are getting huge gains off Miami when they're running the ball, and Derrick Henry ranks 18th best in the NFL in yards per carry. So I could see him breaking out for a big gain, excuse me. Anything else here? Trying to just look at some other notes or players that I have here. Let's go see, where I don't know if we looked to see where Miami, or no, it was Baltimore. We haven't really looked to see where Baltimore's been allowing a lot of touchdowns this season. They've allowed the third most rushing touchdowns to running backs. They're about average at receiving touchdowns to running backs. Was it Baltimore's that we looked at? Yeah, so that was Baltimore. So we're looking for Miami's touchdown vulnerability. Miami looks like they're about average at rushing touchdowns allowed to running backs. Miami is good at preventing running backs from receiving touchdowns. Miami's about average relative to the other teams in the league at preventing wide receiver touchdowns. Miami has allowed 3 receiving touchdowns to tight ends. What about to quarterbacks? They've allowed the most rushing touchdowns to quarterbacks. Miami has allowed the most rushing yards. That makes me kind of really like Lamar Jackson anytime touchdown. He's from Florida, and Miami's allowed the most rushing touchdowns to quarterbacks this year. People are probably a little bit more hesitant about picking Lamar Jackson for an anytime touchdown on his first game back. I feel like it's the best spot to take it, really. Tua will not let me down tonight. Last week he had 0, but it was a blowout. He hit his lines, I believe, every other game. Yeah, so the over under 2.5 rushing yards he's hit out of 6 out of 8 games this season. So he's 75% to the over on that this season. He was also above 50% at that last year when it was over 2.5 rushing yards. So I want to take Chubb of the Dolphins for a sack. I believe he has like 4 or 5 sacks so far. Cool, man. Lamar Jackson, 2 passing touchdowns, minus 200, good parlay piece. Yeah, that's what I was thinking too, Ivan. Maybe, as like a parlay piece or something like that. So, but I think that just about does it. Yeah, like I said, I feel more comfortable in the NBA slate today. But if I were to have to lean towards a side in this one, I'd have to go with Miami. Just think that Baltimore defense is too weak, but maybe they're getting some guys back to being healthy. Also, guys, I mean, just Tua and Waddle specifically have done really well. They set single game records against the Baltimore Ravens back in 2022. So I could see it again here tonight. Ravens winning the division. Yeah, and I do like the Ravens to come out on top in this one. I do have to lean towards the Ravens winning this game. Covering, sure, I could see him do it. But I have to lean towards Miami covering in this one. That plus 7.5. I've been good on primetime games, but I'm not perfect, all right? I'm not perfect. You're not going to see me get every single pick right. But I have been better in primetime games with the lines and regular Sundays, noon games or 3 p.m. games. Yeah, that's how I'm feeling too, Colt. He's either just going to break out tonight or fall flat. I think he's going to do good tonight. I think a lot of people are hesitant on taking players for the overs on their player props when it's their first day back. I could see him having a pretty good rushing game. I know he's coming back from that hamstring, and the general public is probably like, oh, I need to see him play a game before I take the over on his rushing prop. So there was a guy earlier this year that the same thing happened. It was his first day back, and I think it was Justin Fields or something, and he went wild. So, and like Ivan was saying, Lamar Jackson is from Florida. He's from the Miami area, so he may have friends and family attending this game tonight, and he really wants to show up and show out. And also, Miami has allowed the most rushing touchdowns to quarterbacks this season. So, and Miami's just been vulnerable to that rush to running backs and quarterbacks. I think after Henry had his 2-touchdown game last week, now he didn't go crazy with the yards, but I could see him being a popular anytime touchdown player tonight that doesn't get one. He may get the yards. I would still have to lean towards him going under the 90 and a half rushing yards, but he is in a very favorable spot tonight going against a Miami defense who has allowed the third most rushing yards to running backs this season. Also, as I mentioned earlier, Miami is allowing huge gains to running backs, to any rusher this season. They've allowed the fourth most yards per rush attempt this season. Henry ranks 18th best in the NFL in rushing yards per game, or not per game, per attempt. Excuse me. He's got that talent, though. He could miss. He could go months without playing and just come back and turn up. It's so natural to him, right? And it seems like you might be a Ravens fan here, Colts. How do you? I was just browsing through the internet and I saw that maybe the Ravens are getting healthier on the defensive side of the ball, or they're getting more confidence. How do you feel about their defense? I mean, I'm looking at these numbers and it looks awful. The Ravens last year, I believe they allowed the fewest rushing yards per game. This season, they ranked 23rd in that category, so they're below average. Also, that pass defense ranks 28th in passing yards allowed per game this year. So, it's very concerning to me. If you guys feel like Baltimore puts the clamps on tonight, defensively, then they might be the play here. But I got to see it. I got to see it before I believe it. And I really like Tua and Waddle's. I know I keep saying it, but I really do like Tua and Waddle's history against the Ravens. They both set single game records against the Ravens back in 2022. Keep in mind, though, Pat Ricard is back now, so that's going to boost Henry a ton. Okay. So I'm guessing he's an offensive lineman. I look at a lot of statistics, so I don't necessarily know. Oh, fullback. I don't necessarily know every name for the other positions, like offensive linemen and stuff like that. Like I said, I'm not the only source to use. Like, there's plenty of other knowledgeable people within the Not Move podcast and outside of the Not Move podcast that you can just keep stacking this information with and come up with the best decision that you feel like. But I do what I can to give you guys statistics. The Ravens for the last, and just my picks, like what I think about. I used to sell sports picks, and I don't anymore because I'd rather just be able to talk on these shows freely. Whenever I was selling the picks, I was pretty limited on what I could say, And once again, I don't really like parlays, but if you guys do, if you're interested, if you scan that QR code, it'll take you to Southgate's parlays. So he's probably a better guy, to do that with. But I'm more of like a singles guy and really like to pick my spots carefully. The Ravens for the last few years always come out the gate with a terrible D and dominate the second half of the season. I think it has to do a lot with Zach Orr being a second-year coordinator. Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, man, last year their pass defense was putting up similar numbers to this season. It was bad. But near the end of the year, it seemed like they really cleaned that up. But I feel like there was a game in the playoffs that maybe it came back to bite him, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember all the specifics, but yeah, you seem like you're a Ravens fan, and you're pretty knowledgeable about this team and what they're capable of. So we all really appreciate your insight. And if anybody else has any questions or comments, feel free to chime in, not just on this show, but any show. Don't feel like I value everybody's input, even if it's the mother-in-law giving out her parlay on Thanksgiving and she doesn't even watch football. Like sometimes that's what hits, so last couple of years. Cool. Well, yeah, I think that about does it here. I guess just to recap, yeah, I'm gonna have to lean towards Miami plus the 7.5 tonight. I think some player props worth looking into are the Tua passing yards, Lamar Jackson over the 1.5 touchdown passes, which it's heavily juiced, but and I could see it happening, but not necessarily my favorite spot there. Justice Hill over the receiving and or receptions, 16.5 receiving yards and or receptions, the 2.5. Jalen Waddle, I think, is in a pretty decent spot here for anything. Receiving yards, receptions, and or touchdowns. Zay Flowers, I'm a little, Miami's done really well at defending receiving yards allowed to wide receivers and receptions to wide receivers. But it seems like Zay Flowers is Lamar Jackson's favorite target this season. But if I'm Lamar Jackson tonight, I'm looking for Justice Hill and Mark Andrews through the air. I like Mark Andrews receiving yards and possibly an anytime touchdown. I mean, he scored a touchdown in 3 out of 3 career games against Miami. Also, this is the first game where Lamar Jackson and Isaiah Likely are playing in a game together. I think the chemistry may be a little off. And in a must-win game, I feel like for the Ravens, if I'm Lamar Jackson, I'm going with to a tight end that I'm more comfortable with. I have a little bit of chemistry with this season instead of Likely. Achane props, I think, have to be on the table. Miami's more of a passing team. And, Baltimore's not great nor terrible at defending against running back, receiving yards, and or receptions. If I were to have to lean towards receiving or rushing prop, I mean, Achane's honestly in a pretty decent spot. So if you like him, I could see something. And then I would have to lean towards Lamar Jackson going over the rushing yards, 36.5, and possibly getting a touchdown, more so than Derrick Henry rushing yards or getting a touchdown. So I think like players to fade in my eyes would be players that I'm concerned about is going to be Derrick Henry, Isaiah Likely, who for Miami would I be concerned about? I mean, it's tough to be concerned about anybody from Miami because the Ravens defense hasn't been good this year, so, but, just to narrow it down with the Miami players, yeah, man, Tua, Waddle would be my go-tos in this one. Probably Waddle more than anybody. And for a sleeper player for Miami, maybe that tight end. We were talking about him. I think he's going under the radar a little bit here. Baltimore has allowed the 10th most receiving yards to tight ends this season. And we got Tanner Conner in here. Now, I don't know not much about this guy, but maybe you do. And he looks like he's in a decent spot here. So, yeah, huge fan. They just need to play better in the playoffs. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I like the Ravens, man. I think they're a fun team to watch when they're healthy. And I'm really looking forward to this game tonight. I think it's going to be, a good one. I know a lot of people are leaning towards this being a high-scoring game, and I could see it. I just almost feel like it's too good to be true. Like, both of these teams are really good at going over the total points this season. They're both 6-1 to the over this season. And, well, Miami's 6-1-1. And just seems like it's going to be a high-scoring game, and I think that's what everybody's rooting for, but it almost seems too good to be true. Bettors, Keaton Mitchell, is he good for like receiving yards since Ravens do bad versus rushers receiving? Yeah. If you have props on him, yeah. Receiving yards allowed by the Ravens, they're about average to that running back position. I don't know much about that guy, but, not only does Miami call the 9th highest percentage of passing plays this season, but, it's really, what are his tendencies? Does he like to go to his running back? Does he go there? Does he go there often? I know he likes to go to Achane, but when Achane's off, does he still go to this other guy? And I can just browse it real quick, Let's just go check last week against the Falcons. Receiving, and you said, what's this guy's name? Keaton Mitchell. Let's just go look at Keaton Mitchell game log here. I feel like he's with the Ravens, right? Yeah, he's with the Ravens. I understand your question now. Does Baltimore like to go to their running backs? Yeah, Miami is vulnerable, right, to receiving yards and receptions allowed to running backs, but it doesn't really seem like this guy is getting a whole lot of work. So I would check to see, if he's expected to get an increase of workload tonight. He only has one target this season, Ivan. So I'm skeptical about it, but maybe you've heard some news where this guy is going to come in and see an increased workload. But I'd still have to lean more towards Justice Hill. Justice Hill hasn't been getting really any playing time lately, so that's an iffy one. But they might use him a lot more since LJ is back. Justice Hill has been getting. So that's an iffy one. Yeah, I hear you on that, man. Need a pick in the first quarter for my underdog fantasy streaks. Which player prop should hit in the first quarter? What do you think, chat? What player prop's going to hit in the first quarter? My bread and butter, what I really like to focus on is the money lines and spreads. That's what I feel most comfortable with. And then it's going to be the full game player props, and then it's the over under game total. But we can look up something for you here, Carlos. So first quarter, let's go take a look. I think what we would have to do with that is look at each individual game log to see. And I'm sure there are also tools out there that have like first quarter trends. Like I see a bunch of apps nowadays that give you like this player has gone over this total in this many games in the first quarter. It's not necessarily something I specialize in, but hey, thanks, Ivan. Thanks for joining today too. The Ravens first quarter or first half, and Dolphins went outright. So he's just so what about player props in the first quarter for the Ravens? So let's just go look at this game against Buffalo. I would just look for trends, you know. So it looks like Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson rush. It seems like on this first drive, it was a lot of Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry against Buffalo in that first game. And then let's go check against the Cleveland in this game. Justice Hill, pass, Derrick Henry. So that was bad against Cleveland. Honestly, I think, if I had more time today, I would sit down here with you and look at these individual box scores. But you still have a lot of time to do that. I would go look at these games that Lamar Jackson has played in, which were the first 4 games. Go into these box scores and look at that first drive. Look at these drives in the first quarter and see if there's anything that is similar that continues to happen. It looks like Derrick Henry, and he's in a good spot tonight. Maybe Derrick Henry rushing yards. I don't know what that first quarter line is. Like I said, if I had some more time, I'd go look into it with you. But that's what I would do. And also, first quarter NFL trends is something that I'll just type in my search engine here. Player props. And a lot of these sites sometimes make you like pay money or something like that, So yeah, it just seems like a lot of these sites want you to pay money for it. So I mean, usually when websites are, usually when websites are like that, I just back on out. To be honest with you, I mean, I understand they put in a lot of work to get you the data and they want to charge and stuff, but I don't know. I'm not too big on like charging people for information. I think there was a guy that I was listening to, and he's just like, dude, we should all have access to the same information. And that's what a lot of this comes down to, what information do you have access to? NBA show today. Let's do the NBA show here and just here in a few minutes. Let me take a little break here. Been on for about an hour. NBA show is going to last probably about the same amount of time. So let's do the NBA show here soon, Ivan. Probably within the next 30 minutes. But yeah, I appreciate you guys. I appreciate the support, the likes, the comments, the engagement. Thank you guys so much. Then I'd like to give a special thank you to the sponsors: BetUS, MyBookie.ag, Walmart.com, Open Goal, the MLB and NFL Pro Shops. Thank you guys so much. If you guys scan that QR code up there, it'll get you to those resources and you can take advantage of a lot of deals that they have for you guys. Also, Southgate's parlays. As I mentioned, I don't like parlays, but that doesn't mean that I'm here to tell you to not do it, right? That's just my preference. I've seen a lot of people make sports bets more than you would think. And, parlays, just in my opinion, are not the way to go. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't work for some people. I've actually heard Southgate's been real good with those parlays. So if that's what you're interested in, you can add yourself another tool to your arsenal here. And yeah, good luck, everybody. Thank you so much. Carlos says Henry over under 19.5 rushing yards first quarter, but we'll do my research. Thanks. Yeah, absolutely, man. And if you ever want to message me some questions that you want me to answer on future shows, that may take a little bit of time. Well, I'm on a bunch of different social media platforms. So if you ever want to just message me directly, some questions, I'll do my best to address them at the start of the next show, which the next football show will be Sunday morning, probably at around 9 a.m. Eastern time. But the NBA show will be coming up here within the next 30 minutes or so. But all right, guys, thank you so much for joining. Not moved out. Good luck.
This non-casual podcast may not be reproduced, retransmitted, or reused without the authorized written consent of the Not Move Podcast Network. Thank you, and we hope you enjoyed today's broadcast.